Welcome back to Sport Integrity Week. Ben Jacobs with you. Final panel of day 2 is a 5-day event. The full program can be found on our website and link registration on social media as well. Hashtag SIW. It's a global event, so we're catering for everyone in terms of topics, but also times as well. I know the American market are a little bit behind us, but as a consequence, we're going late some days. We're starting earlier other days to also bring in the Middle East and North Africa. You'll see a QR code come up as well regularly throughout the course of the next 3 days and possibly between now and when we close as well. And when it pops up, if you quick enough, you can sync it up and you'll get the URL to our Eventbrite link. Or if you're a bit slower, like you can go to our social handles and the URL is posted there as well. That allows you to donate if you so wish and have the means. We, of course, appreciate that times are tough for many during this COVID-19 era, but if you can spare anything towards SIGA's development, it is a non-profit organisation. To get to partake in a poll as well. There's lots of different options as to how we think we can spend the money, ranging from events like this to a SIGA and specific research on various issues that have come to inaugural. And if you tell us where you want the money allocated, we'll factor that into the distribution as well. So that's the housekeeping, if you like. We encourage you again to make sure that you input your questions through the app as well for all of the panels, including our final one today, and the moderators will make sure that they involve you as well. One final point to note is tomorrow we start at 9:30 CET and the panel is on esports. We'll look at gambling as well tomorrow, particularly in the US, which is a much newer market. The gambling laws were changed relatively. So lots to get through. And in terms of a recap of today, we've touched upon a number of issues. We've heard from Louis Saha on athlete protection. We've had good panels on following the money piracy as well. And again, there'll be recaps through our press releases on our website and via social media as well. Let's wrap things. Our final panel, it's last, but it's certainly not least, and it's on our so-called Caribbean stage, which means things are going to turn red or green in just a moment to differentiate between regions. The title of this panel, Protecting Media Rights and Sports Economic Viability, and we will focus in particular on the latter. There will be a lot to talk about, I am sure. Let me bring in our moderator who can tell and introduce you to the panel. She is the principal consultant at Westfield Communications in Trinidad and Tobago. Nicole, it is over to you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Well, I guess as they say, saving the best for last. So the Caribbean is on and we are quite ready. As Ben indicated, we are looking at protecting media rights and sports economic viability. We have quite a distinguished panel to discuss this, to take us through the conversation this evening, and I'm very happy to be moderating. I want to start with one of our first speaker out of Barbados, Itania Wiggins. Itania is the director of the Barbados Olympic Association Incorporated and the Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committees in Barbados. She was a member of the Women's Committee of the Barbados Football Association and was appointed as the first team manager for the Barbados Women's Under-20 and Senior Women's national teams for 5 consecutive years. So she has quite a lot of experience under her belt in that regard, during which time she became a certified referee and level 1 coach. So knowing the sport as well as administration. Itania then relinquished her managerial post to work in the area of sport for development as country coordinator with the A Ganga program, which utilizes sports as a tool to teach at-risk youth employability skills in Latin America and the Caribbean. Itania, if I could welcome you to the panel this evening and just ask you if you could share with us a couple brief remarks and your own thoughts about the topic.
Hi, everybody. Bringing vibes from the Caribbean. We're here. We're in the house. Always the lively bunch. That's who we are. That's our brand. We are the Caribbean. And certainly, yes, I'm from Barbados, but I also represent CANOC, which is the Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committees. And under umbrella, we have 29 National Olympic Caribbean committees and the Commonwealth Game Federations from around the regions, with over 44 plus million people under us. So for us, CANOC represents the Caribbean Sports Hub. And then doing some research, I saw an extract based on our topic where in media rights it said it's estimated that 61% of consumers follow sports online. And certainly in the Caribbean and anywhere else in the world, I mean, it's no secret that the rise of social media has and continues to redefine the global landscape. And if you think about it today, on average, people spend up to 9 hours online, and 1 in 4 sports fans access content via social media. So we kind of have to start thinking about the cultural shift and the exponential growth of social media platforms and the impact it has on the sport media landscape. And it has really, social media has proven to be one of the most cost-effective way for our regional bodies and our athletes to reach new audiences on a global scale. So the biggest question here for me really this evening is, has the Caribbean culturally fully embraced the business potential of the function of social media in the region and in general? And how do we combine our resources to kind of build brand Caribbean by capitalizing both on new media and social media? Thank you.
Thank you, Itanya. And I like how you've kicked the ball and got us going, particularly around the question of the use of social media and how we effectively leverage that for our audiences, both across the Caribbean and globally, as well as how we build a sort of a collective and a collaborative as a region. Certainly our next speaker is not hailing from the Caribbean per se, but we like to think of him as a Caribbean person. Sean Riley is the president of Sean Riley Media and is an expert in sport media rights, sports sponsorship sales, live sports production, and content distribution. Sean is also the founder and former managing director of Flow Sports. During his time at Flow Sports, which concluded in around 2019, so not that long ago, Sean helped to build Flow Sports from the ground up and managed all aspects of Flow Sports business, including sports rights acquisition, sponsorship sales, original content development, live sports production, marketing, digital OTT, and wholesale distribution. So a lot of experience coming in for us there. And I'm really happy to bring Sean into the discussion for him to bring to bear some of his own thoughts as we explore this topic. Sean?
Thanks, appreciate it. Thanks for everybody for taking the time to join us today. I think when we take a look at what I wanted to share a little bit with you about was the value of media rights. And when you look at emerging sports organizations, especially in the Caribbean, the value of your media rights is really equal to the number of fans who want to watch, right? And so at the end of the day, the reason why sports networks are interested in the Premier League and the IPL and the Diamond League and large events is because they're going to attract, a tremendous amount of viewers. And of course, that's going to lead to sponsorship, and that's going to lead to more value for the network. But if you're an emerging sports organization, a lot of organizations look at this backwards, right? If you're a football league in the Caribbean, or if you are an Olympic committee in the Caribbean, in some cases they look at it backwards and they say, if I can just get my games on a local network, a local OTT platform or a sports network, I'm going to grow my fan base that way. And you could do that. You could buy time on a TV station. You could spend a lot of money on production, but most of us don't have those resources. And at the end of the day, the onus really is on you to build that engagement and to grow your fan base, and then go to sponsors and then go to networks and persuade them that they should cover your events, that they should partner with you and with your athletes, because you're going to deliver a fan base, you're going to deliver some sponsorship, and you're going to deliver eyeballs, which is really what those networks need. And we can certainly get into more detail about exactly how to go about doing that. But I think it's important to remember that that building the fan base first is probably the most important when it comes to networks. Networks and OTT platforms have very limited budgets. They've spent most of their programming dollars on the biggest and highest priced properties. But if you can show them that, you can bring in viewers and sponsors and a few more things to the table, then they certainly want to hear from you. And I'm happy to talk more about ways that, that we can achieve that together with networks and sporting organizations on the call.
Thanks very much, Sean, for that intro. So definitely, if we build it, they will come. And that's not just the fans. Interesting and I think very important for organizations and associations to consider as we go forward. It takes us naturally into a conversation, I guess, into a discussion around the athlete and where the athlete sits in this. And I'm very happy to bring in at this point Ms. Carla Paris. Carla is a vibrant and seasoned entertainment and sports lawyer operating out of Trinidad, but definitely working across the Caribbean and externally as well. Beyond that, as a sports lawyer, talk show host as well, entrepreneur and content creator. So to some extent, and to a great extent, I should say, Carla sees it from different perspectives. She operates the first boutique law practice in Trinidad and Tobago, whose exclusive focus is in the entertainment, intellectual property, and sports law. She advises clients in traditional corporate industries on a variety of copyright and trademark concerns and provides specialist advice to persons in music, film, animation, events, event management, fashion, etc. A lot of other people may also know Carla as the producer and host of a YouTube talk show entitled The Business of Carnival, which was designed to educate persons on the legal and business aspects of the carnival industry. And over the years, she has published several newspaper articles on the importance of intellectual property law to the creative sector, operating as well as operating as a consultant to the government of Trinidad and Tobago, OECS Commission, and other agencies. Carla, welcome to the conversation, and I'll just turn it over to you for a couple of remarks.
Thank you, Nicole. As you said, I'm an entertainment and sports lawyer, as well as the media owner of a YouTube series. So really what I wanted to add to the discussion is the whole importance, I think now, especially for athletes, to consider the commercialization of their images, commercialization and development of their brands off of the field. In a scenario where, of course, there's been a huge shutdown of the ability to perform sports in a traditional way. So I actually think COVID has provided an opportunity for athletes, for club owners, for leagues to look at the exploitation of their intellectual property quite differently, and to look at the whole question of content creation quite differently through the eyeball of revenue generation and long-term revenue generation, so that there's economic stability and a livelihood outside of the traditional playing of sport. So I want to leave it there because I know that time is limited and we need to get into the discussion.
Thank you so much, Carla. And last but by no means least, taking some of your points and as we go further, I just want to at this point introduce Mr. Dalton Myers, who's also on our panel. Dalton, coming in from Jamaica, is currently the corporate planner at the Jamaica Olympic Association. He's an entrepreneur, sports consultant, sports commentator, and columnist for the Jamaica Gleaner, and an authorized IATF athlete representative and podcast host. So a multidisciplinary personality indeed. He's also the former director of sport at the University of the West Indies of the Mona campus, and the immediate past president of the Jamaica Intercollegiate Sports Association, and recently concluded his stint as the director of the Jamaica Cricket Association. Dalton, if I could ask you to just share some of your thoughts as you've heard Itanya, Carla, and Sean earlier.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nicole. Listen, it's great being the last person because I could just agree with everyone else, what they have said so far. And then I could just stop. I think my only addition is to say thanks for having me, and afternoon to everyone in the Caribbean and the Americas. But certainly the protecting of media rights is crucial. And I think that has been very important for us here in the Caribbean. And part of the discussion that we probably will be having is how organizations or media groups like Flow Sports and Sportsmax have changed some of that in terms of the content that comes into the Caribbean, the competition that happens with free-to-air TV and radio stations here in the Caribbean, and how that has helped athletes, clubs, how it has helped member associations, etc. So those have been crucial for us. I think without media rights, without getting some of that content, without tapping into the market, it's very difficult to build the sporting industry. I think the part B of that, I should probably say, is building the sporting industry in the Caribbean has been very slow, but it is something that we have to push every chance that we get, whether it's intellectual property, whether it's social media, whatever that is going to be. So part of the framing and the discussions for us is going to be how we have tapped into the market, a lot of what needs to be done, because we're just about 0.5% of the world population, and how do we earn from that is going to be crucial moving forward.
Thanks a lot, Sean. Great content indeed, a lot for us to get into, so I won't delay. Just to let those of us, just let the participants know and other on the call that if you do want to send in your questions, please feel free and go ahead and do so via the chat. And we will be taking a look at them as the conversation progresses. As we talked a lot, I think each of you would have mentioned a lot of critical areas for us to look at from a Caribbean perspective and standpoint. And Itanya, if I could just go back to you in terms of the top of the conversation, we're seeing more and more instances in sport where clubs, either singly or as a group, are seeking greater input in the negotiation and decision-making process for broadcast and media rights. And I think certainly Sean expressed some of the considerations that these associations and groups should take on. But what I wanted to maybe to point to you and anyone else on the panel as we discuss it is why do you think that is happening? We saw there's a recent case being reported of out of Bolivia where certain members of their football league are seeking to be part of that negotiation process where the league is negotiating with a particular agency for broadcast and media rights. Why do you think that's happening now, or what can we attribute to some of these developments?
Well, certainly, thanks, Nicole. Certainly the whole talk around there's power in numbers. If one club goes to negotiate, as Sean or any of the panelists will tell you, you are going to bring less eyes to the table. But if you go as a league and as a collective, then you certainly will triple or quadruple your offerings to the table. And the same thing with CANOC. CANOC is certainly an emerging organization, and we have 29 countries. But if we allow one of our countries to go negotiate media rights, say for the Olympics or anything, the conversation will be different as opposed to us cannot taking 29 countries to the table for our negotiations. So certainly now the development in the market is no longer to go as a singular entity, but to bring the backing of all the national associations behind you, because only then, like for the Caribbean itself, we can actually pool our resources together because we kind of have the same goals. If you think about it, we want to attain world championship participation and we all want that Olympic glory. But in terms of negotiating against the bigger countries, Dalton said, we're 0.5% of the world population. So when we're going negotiating, we're only 44 plus million people. 5%. So how do you now whittle down that 5% and have a conversation with certainly a smaller Caribbean island? So the Bolivia context, I'm totally for it. And in terms of negotiating our media rights, and then let's talk about our social media rights. Our power is in our numbers, and each island and the Caribbean has to start moving more as a collective if we certainly want to capitalize on any benefits in media.
Yes, I certainly can agree with you there. There is power in numbers. Sean, from your perspective, and I just want to bring you into the conversation, you talked about really focusing on building that value at the top end, and and really committing, not just from a fan perspective, but also how do you attract the media entity? How do you attract those agencies? given what Tanya is pointing to and the very valid point that she's making, where do you see that connection or collaboration, and how do you suggest, I guess, is where I'm coming from. How do you suggest that we get that kind of value in?
Look, I think Tanya is absolutely right when she talks about the fact that a group of that the organizations are valuable, even more valuable to the networks as a group as opposed to individual entities. Now, when I meet with sporting organizations, when I work with sporting organizations, especially in the Caribbean, the ones that are emerging, I remind them that they have to look at building engagement like a political campaign, right? I think it's about repetition across social media platforms, and it's about building that engagement through stirring the passion that your fan base has, right? Constantly, right? So it's a weekly, day in, day out grind. It's selling them on why they should, follow your Instagram feeds and your Facebook posts, and what is your brand, right? Are you the place for emerging stars in the Caribbean? Are you the home of Caribbean fight content? Are you the preeminent pro football league in your region? I think it has to really, when you think about building engagement, that's the only way you're going to attract networks, is that you have to come to the network with a very strong value proposition. It can't, so many times we see pitches at the network level for leagues that would come in and say, hey, we want you to come cover our games. We want you to pay for all the production, and we want you to put us on TV. And look, we would love to do that. All the networks would love to do that, but we just don't have the resources, right? And we need to know that you're going to deliver some type of audience and that you are going to work with us to help drive your brand. So one of the things we talk about when we talk about emerging sporting organizations and getting to that next level of engagement is to partner with your athletes. It's so crucial, right? Your athletes have to be a very, very big part, of course, of your value proposition. Look at any sporting league in the world. It's the athletes that drive the values, the athletes that drive all the viewership and all the interest. And whether it's Lionel Messi or LeBron James or everybody in between, athletes even in the Caribbean market, and as you have some, of course, you have the Elaine Thompsons, but athletes at every level have some amount of sort of celebrity, if you will. And if you're an athlete watching right now, it's like you should be asking your sporting organization, what can you do to drive engagement, right? What can you do to help that organization grow and build their fan base? And sporting organizations need to give their athletes, I think, ways to engage, and need to help them provide them tools, essentially. They can, whether it's just things they can repost, or whether it's other information about events that they can use to build that fan base, because this is a symbiotic relationship, right? And Dalton touched on it earlier. Athletes have the ability to drive sporting organizations, and sporting organizations have the ability to drive athlete brands. And together, it's so much more valuable, right? You shouldn't be relying on the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee to drive your entire brand. And conversely, if you're an athlete, you shouldn't have to do all the heavy lifting yourself. So I think it's really important. You look at somebody like Andrew Lewis, right, who is an Olympian out of Trinidad and Tobago, right? We all know, if you live in the Caribbean, Andrew Lewis's name, not because we're all big fans of sailing, and no offense to sailing content, but he's an Olympian, he's a sailor, and we know his story because he's done a fabulous job of promoting himself, right? And then the TTOC, the Olympic Committee of Trinidad and Tobago, can use that as well to help drive their brand and build that engagement. So the next thing I think you have to have, in addition to that athlete sort of partnership, is getting content out there. I think it doesn't really matter what the content is. It doesn't really matter how. It can be shot in most cases on a mobile phone. It's just getting those pieces of content out, video content, on a regular basis. That's highlights, workouts, training sessions, it's athlete interviews, it's polls, it's giveaways, whatever it happens to be, nutrition tips. I mean, and that has to go across every platform. And it's something that, whether it's Snapchat or TikTok or, YouTube or Instagram, all of that video content is easy for you to shoot, whether you're an athlete or whether you're a sporting organization. It's easy to shoot, it's easy to upload, and it's easy to put out there. It doesn't cost you any money. And it really helps with engagement. And so I always remind, the folks that I work with that sort of that day in, day out video content and engagement is easy to do, it's free, and it's really, really important as a sporting organization. And then after that, now you've got, as you grow, now you have a whole bunch of athletes that are out there with tons of social media followings. You have a lot of people following your social media. Now you take that, and before you go to the network, right? You're still not going to go to the TV network or the OTT platform. You're going to a sponsor, right? And you're going to say, look, we have this many impressions. I know sponsorship is hard. I know it's not easy, right? But we have this many social media impressions, and we have this many likes on our Facebook page, and we have this many viewers on our Facebook Live events. We went out and shot our local event with a couple of cameras, very low budget production, and we had this many viewers. And then now you have your army of athletes, working in partnership with you. You have a sponsor maybe bringing in a little bit of money, and maybe they can help fund a little bit of TV production. And now you go to the networks. I mean, look, sponsors don't care where those eyeballs come from, right? You don't have to be on TV to attract a sponsor. You can argue to a sponsor that you have engagement across a gazillion digital platforms, and in aggregate, that's a pretty valuable proposition to go to a sponsor. And so don't think about sponsorship as just, well, if I'm not on TV or if I'm not on a sports OTT platform, I can't attract sponsors. I mean, I think the sort of the amalgamation of all of those social media touch points and all that engagement is pretty valuable for a sponsor. So, but it's something you got to do every day, and you got to drive it really hard. And then once you have the sponsors and your athletes and everything's working, then you can go to a network and say, hey, I've got a little bit of sponsorship dollars that'll help me fund production. I have this great proposition. I've got great content, of course, on the pitch or on the track or on the field, and I'm going to help you. Right? It's not just go cover my event, but together we have a vested interest, the sporting organization and the network, to say, hey, how are we going to help drive this together, right? And what are the things we're going to offer, right, through our sponsors and through our social media, and together, how are we going to promote this event and make it valuable for you? That's really kind of the holistic approach, the 360 approach that I always advise sporting organizations to take, because that just makes you very, very valuable to a network. And it gives you a much better chance, and it gives you a competitive edge versus a lot of other organizations that just come to networks and say, hey, come cover my local event. So that's the advice I typically give.
Thank you very much, Sean. And in a lot of ways, you're talking my language in terms of the integrated marketing approach, and that storytelling and communication strategic approach that both the agencies, the associations, and the athletes can take together. Which brings us into, I want to bring Carla in here, because Carla has done a lot of work with the athlete in terms of that image building and that brand development, as well as from her own business perspective and experience, how you market and how you get out there in front of the media platforms and owners. So Carla, maybe you can take it from where Sean has left off and bring in some of that experience.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that Sean made some really excellent points, especially from the standpoint of the athlete and or the organization, when negotiating these media rights and so forth, sort of going already with a package and going with some data. Because I think that's often what's lacking, in these proposals when organizations, sporting leagues or whoever, like Sean said, go to Flow Sports or maybe a Direct TV or whatever network with a view to them portraying or distributing your particular event. There is not a clear argument in terms of the return on investment to that particular platform holder. And what I also wanted to point out in terms of the discussion, and Sean also alluded to it, was the question of working together with the athlete as opposed to competing with an athlete. Because I have seen some of these agreements where it almost appears as though the club or the organization is wanting to prevent a particular athlete or from building his or her own brand independently from the club. but I don't think they understand the value that an athlete who is prominent, who's globally known, internationally known, can bring to that particular media right or broadcast of the event separately and in tandem. You know, so if I want to draw from some of my own practical experience of working with athletes, I mean, I know he's not an Olympian, but he's a well-known, renowned cricketer. So I'm going to rely on the experience of Dwayne Bravo. So currently he has about 3.5 million followers on Instagram. So let us say, you know, he was entering into negotiation, or, you know, CPL or whoever was entering into negotiations for media rights. Obviously, in an agreement like that, you would want to make sure that he or other cricketers or just athletes in general have the right to repost content, to some extent, have the right to promote different things that may be going on and off the field that obviously do not operate outside of the ambit of a specific agreement, but can work to generate more of a following, generate more of an audience in a situation where right now fans are not able to go there and have the experiential time that they're accustomed to. As Caribbean people, we like to lime, we like to go to an event. It's part of our social, you know, sort of networking and so forth. That's not there. But if we created agreements where the athlete also had the opportunity in his or her own unique way and with their specific personalities and traits to allow them to engage the following, I think that that goes a very long way. And also to draw from my experience of finding sponsors, or as I like to call it, brand partners for a social media show, which I certainly had to do along the years from developing this content on YouTube and then creating, you know, related pages on Facebook and so on Instagram. It was very much along the lines of what Sean again pointed out, the question of providing data, analytics, and understanding of who the audience is. And even fine details like is the audience purely female? Is it men to female? What's the ratio? What are the countries that this content is seen? What's the level of engagement? How are people engaging? Because it's one thing to have a page or let's say a club with 100,000 followers or 1 million followers, but if there's no active engagement on that post, nobody's discussing, nobody's getting heated, nobody's interested in follow up, then that's not a great sell to a brand or to a television network, you know. So I think it's a whole question now of COVID providing, again, as I said earlier, an opportunity for a new means of educating athletes and educating sports organization, leagues, national sporting organizations, as we call them in Trinidad, NSOs, on the importance of social media education. Because there are many athletes who are emerging and they're very, very bright, gifted, and can be marketed and so forth to channels, either it be traditional TV or online platforms, but they have no understanding, none whatsoever, of how to leverage these platforms to generate income and to generate income for their clubs.
Thanks, Carla. Dalton, what are some of your thoughts as you've heard what the panel has had to say? Certainly, I think Itania's comment around the use of social media and how social media has, in a lot of ways, changed the game. Sean coming in from the expectation of the media owner and the media company, and then marrying that with Carla's own experience as well as her work with the athlete, where we see real opportunity for the athlete and the sporting group or body to come together. I mean, if we you know, just from where you sit in Jamaica, some of our most famous, some of our most successful athletes coming out of Jamaica, and you know, in terms of a brand, in terms of their development of the sport, what are some of the things that you are seeing in terms of that development, and if we want to think of it in terms of the business of sport?
Yeah, no, well, I think one of the things is that certainly the other panelists have touched on some really good points, and I know Sean, because Sean had brought me on at Flow Sports 4 years ago to work with the Olympics. And part of the challenge we had at that time is really that's part of the challenge from a Caribbean perspective. We don't always have statistics and data on our athletes, member associations, etc. So that's a big thing that we have to build. Certainly coming out of Jamaica, obviously we lead the Caribbean in terms of producing medals at games, etc. That doesn't suggest that the other Caribbean countries aren't doing well, because as I've said to Itania off air, in Trinidad, for example, they do have more athletes going to an Olympic Games in more sport than, say, for example, at Jamaica, just that we get more medals. I think there needs to be more collaborations, Nicole, and everyone.
Yeah.
More collaborations in the region in terms of projects, in terms of development, in terms of statistics, in terms of research, etc. We do have a University of the West Indies Faculty of Sports. We have various universities and colleges, but we need to have more research in that, because the market is there. The sporting industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry that we can tap into. And the other part of it, I might add, is when it comes on to our athletes. And we've been talking about it. I think we have to get our athletes more in the region to appreciate social media, to appreciate traditional media and what those can do for them, And we've been talking about COVID, etc. But I think most athletes now have to appreciate that, one, your cable stations are crucial, yes, whether they're doing interviews or not. But secondly, their podcasts, well, certainly like mine, but there are podcasts around that they can be a part of those podcasts as a guest. They can do Instagram lives, they can do Facebook lives, they can do all of those in curating their content, in getting all of that content. Now, here's the other tricky part though, is that in developing those content, there are IP considerations, or the type of content they use, the issues that come with that. So they will need some assistance. And might I add, because I did say the last thing, but might I add, there was a presentation, a session earlier, probably about 2 hours ago, talking about the issues relating to piracy and the issues relating to how do we have laws that protect the rights holder from piracy. That's an international and global issue. But certainly that's a discussion that we also have to have in the Caribbean, because many of our rights holders are facing huge challenges in trying to protect their content, protect their brand, etc. So there's a huge amount of things. I think my conclusion from all of that is that the region is right, Nicole, to get some of the returns from this. I think Sean has talked about it, Itania, Carla, etc., in terms of some of the things that we can do to get some of that support. It has to be with our athletes, or our clubs and associations, or member associations. And also, crucially and importantly, we have to look at some of the issues surrounding gender and sport, and how we ensure that we have equity in whether the boardroom or in terms of the images that are portrayed on our TV screen. So there are quite a number of things, because we have to ensure that our girls and women can see representations of themselves on TV, so that they are encouraged to be there, to participate, to train harder, and to try and get some of that funding that is out there for them in sports. And so there's a whole gamut of things that we have to look at. But certainly, we have to collaborate, or we have to look at the region and our respective resources that we have to offer.
Yeah, certainly. Yatanya, I want to bring you back in here, particularly around Dalton's comment in terms of representation and gender equality, based on some of your own experiences, as well as in terms of how we represent on social media platforms, and ensuring that while we leverage those platforms effectively, both as athletes and as the associations, we also use them responsibly and ensure that we protect people as we leverage those platforms. Any comment there?
Certainly, I totally am on board with Dalton there. And if we're being honest, 10 years ago, we would not be having, not even 5 years ago, would we be having this conversation about social media representation. Yeah. We all know in the region used to sit down and wait for your free-to-air TV and watch the sports news, or wait for it to appear in the main page of publication. No longer is that the way our athletes are developing. And we as NOCs kind of have to think about it. Our athletes now are creating or curating curating their own content. They're learning on their own to start doing their own lives. And we have athletes in the region who their viewership has surpassed even the National Olympic Committees and the countries that they represent. We have like Priscilla Frederick, who is really doing great things with her IG live, so much so now she's a social media influencer. And if we think about the market, it's now developing different job titles that weren't there before. So if you are a company, you may decide to go directly to the athlete and not necessarily to the NOC, because then you see the value in what that athlete is bringing as a social media influencer. So we now, in terms of having representation, not only gender representation, but representation of National Olympic Committees and the Caribbean itself, is to decide to start to engage our athletes. I think we can't drop the ball because we're not too far behind, because social media, as I said, is a relatively young platform. So we have to decide if we're going to let that run from us the same way that maybe broadcasting rights got away from us, or we're going to take that product and, as everybody said, start leveraging it, but collaboratively discussing with the NOCs, discussing with the athletes, and then we can collectively take our product now to mainstream market. Because I'm going to be very honest, there are athletes now who, if they were to go to the table and negotiate for media rights, they would outbid, say, one of the countries in the Caribbean because of the numbers that they have. And that's being very honest and straight up. Like, so we as NOCs, we as the regional bodies, be it broadcasting and even sports law, like when you're negotiating contracts now, Carla, I'm sure you now have to write in social media, which is something you probably didn't have to think about years ago. So it is there for us. The decision to monetize it is up to us.
Thank you. And guys, we're seeing a lot of questions already coming in from across the region. So I want to get to some of those questions before we wrap up. But I just want to get one aspect in, particularly with respect to the intellectual property, the protection of the athletes, and also content. Both Sean and Carla talked about developing your own content. Sean, you were very clear that there's a lot of opportunities that the athlete can utilize and leverage himself or herself. Carla, you are recognizing it from a brand perspective in terms of shaping your own brand. I just want to get back to that conversation a bit and maybe ask you, Sean, as you see that evolving in terms of that use of content and that development of content, I should say, how far do you think the athlete and the organization should be going in terms of curating that for themselves, in terms of utilizing the various opportunities?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a partnership, as I said earlier today. I think when you look at athletes and organizations working together, I think there is and Carla can comment on this as well, but I just think that an athlete has so many opportunities to drive their own brand and drive the organization's brand. And there's always going to be a little bit of natural conflict between the sporting organization and the athlete in terms of sort of where their sort of rights end and where the other ones begin. And of course, the higher the level you get, the more that conflict is going to present itself naturally. And there's a lot of very strict, provisions in most agreements these days about what athletes can and can't do. But I think at the levels kind of we're talking about, whether it's local Olympic Committee or whether it's a football league in the Caribbean or any one of the other number of leagues, I think for the most part, this is a very healthy, natural process between athletes and organizations to say, look, we're in this together. Let's grow this together. And as we grow, as I grow as an athlete and as the organization grows, it's going to be best for both of us. So, I mean, you see a little bit happening right now in the United States with the NCAA, with collegiate sports, and how athletes have been fighting to take back some of their intellectual property rights, and athletes now have the ability to do all kinds of sponsorship, sponsored elements, even though they're amateurs, which hasn't been the case for so many years. And so, if you watch that closely, I think you'll get a good sense of, if you look back and take a look at how that evolved, I think you'll get a good sense of kind of how that played out, and how those athletes went from really not being able to do very much with sponsorships or anything aside from basic social media stuff to where they are today, collegiate athletes, where they have a lot more intellectual property rights.
Yes, thank you. And Carla, from your perspective, in terms of the intellectual property as well as protecting the brand, do you think that the athlete wants their voice heard more today, and to be more involved in that presence and that conversation?
Okay, great question. And in terms of the intellectual property, I just wanted to point to two quick areas that are often overlooked by the athletes as well as by, I would say, most national sporting organizations and leagues here in the Caribbean. And that is the actual question of the ownership of the brand. Because we use the word brand loosely and interchangeably with terms like influencer and whatnot. But really, for you to enforce your rights as a brand owner and to quickly and adequately act against infringement, you have to own that brand. So what that means is registering that name as a trademark. And I hardly see that happening across the region. So that's one thing. And the second thing, in terms of the creation of content that we're advocating for, there are so many copyright considerations that we don't really have time to get into all aspects of it. But what I would say is making sure that when the sporting organization or the athlete, let's say, creates content, as in literally going out there, getting a videographer, getting a team. I'm not talking about going on IG Live, but I'm talking about involving third parties to develop this content. We have to make sure that you're entering into proper contractual agreements which speak to ownership of the footage, clearing the music that will be used within it, and all of those various aspects, so that as the club, the organization, the athlete develops all of these various, tools, you're not in a position where you're creating a scenario for yourself where you can't actually exploit what has been created, because there's so many different people's rights tied up into this content. And I think that's where the discussion should be going in the region, a better and stronger understanding, not just of enforcement, but how to assert ownership, because we have very loose arrangements.
Thank you, Carla. I just want to go to one of the questions that we have received and really turn to you, Dalton. How do Caribbean sporting organizations exploit their media rights in the future, given some of the challenges of having live audiences in stadia? And we're seeing that, play itself out now, where athletes are performing on stage and there's no live audience, there's no in-studio, quote-unquote, audience. How are you seeing that playing out?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it depends on certainly where the content is going. I think there's still a lot that is needed in terms of content. I think it depends on whether we're putting it in the diaspora, etc. So, some of these stations locally, whether it's Sportsmax, whether it's Flow Sports, etc., will have to determine where exactly they want to get this content. Does their market want this content? I think there's a market for whatever we have in the Caribbean. And I think a lot of it will depend now on sporting associations negotiating with media companies in terms of the content that is going to go there. And certainly I'm from Jamaica, so we have Red Stripe Premier League and how that will be carried across. So those are crucial information, crucial stuff, but it also depends highly and heavily on how soon we can get sport back up and running in the Caribbean, because as you know, in the Caribbean, we still don't have a lot of our sporting activities taking place, neither with fans or without fans. So that will be crucial moving forward. But I think there is still a market for our content and for these national associations to discuss with the rights holders, to discuss with the media companies in terms of getting the content out there.
Thank you. Sean, if I could bring you in, how do you see, or what are some of the elements and opportunities you see for local and regional federations, perhaps being able to compete against some of the bigger organizations that have really top broadcast quality productions. I mean, if for example, if you look at the NBA, how can the Trinidad and Tobago Basketball Federation, how can they compete to bring their competitions, their leagues on television to almost compete? Or do you see it as a competition, I guess, is one thing. And then if that is the case, how do they level that playing field?
Yeah, that's a challenging question, right? I mean, look, the fact of the matter is, though, sports are. Let's go back to the core foundation of sports, and that is that for a cable network, for a telco operator, live sports is still a very, very important part of the value proposition, right? It's the only content that is still really viewed live for the most part. It's something that can only be viewed live. It's got a built-in audience. It's got great demographics. It's sport. Live sports is still really, really popular, and it's very, very valuable. And so, in terms of competing with the largest, with the NBA, I mean, the reason why sports are valuable is because sports are tribal, right? So, as Dalton, reminded us, as every Jamaican athlete does when they get on the call, that Jamaicans, dominate the gold medals in the Olympics. So thank you for reminding us of that, Dalton, earlier.
I
knew you dropped that in. I knew you dropped it in at some point. But look, the fact is, the fact is that, sports are tribal. And so if you were a highly local league with a passionate following, right, then you're going to get viewership, right? And whether you're the TT, Super League, or whether you're the Rugby Federation of Jamaica, you have a passionate following, you have a passionate fan base, and I think you got to drive that. I think you have to drive that that value and remind all your stakeholders, whether it's an OTT platform or whoever you're dealing with, that look, we have a passionate fan base. People want to root for their home teams, so it's great to show an NBA game from the U.S., no question, but there's an equal amount of value for highly regional events. I mean, you look at stuff like the Caribbean Premier League, of course, and everything in between. So I think in West Indies cricket. So I think we should remind all of our stakeholders that sports are tribal, that we want to root for our home teams, our local home team heroes, and that this content at the end of the day is still very, very valuable and a very, very important part of the value proposition for any sports network or any cable or satellite provider, or even local TV networks.
Thanks, Sean. I think that's a very important point to hammer home for our conversation, particularly as we look at the question of integrity. It is SIGA, and it is Sport Integrity Week, and as associations across the region, sporting bodies and associations, that question of accountability and integrity for the sport in terms of for our fan base, and also critically key stakeholder for our athletes. I often wonder, from my own layman's perspective, where does accountability sit, and how do we ensure that even as we are going after the broadcast rights, even as we are trying to get that dollar for the development of the sport, that we ensure the integrity of the sport at the end of the day? Itanya, maybe I can ask you to posit some thoughts on that from your perspective, and get some other perspectives from the rest of the panel afterwards.
Certainly from CANOC's perspective and the NOC's perspectives and the NS perspectives and the athletes' perspectives, accountability lies at every level. It should not be a distinction that only the NOC should be accountable or only the athlete. I think certainly in terms of integrity, everybody has to bring their own integrity, but we are human beings and things are the way they are. So here's where good governance comes into place. And as a governing body, you now have to set certain things in place that are going to govern how your NOC runs, how your national federation runs. And certainly then it comes down to how your coaches, your administrators, and your athletes then not only represent you as brand Caribbean, you as brand Jamaica, Trinidad, brand Caribbean, but then their own brand. And then education comes into play. As I said before, 5 years ago, we would not have a course where we needed to teach our athletes athletes or our NOCs about social media. Now there's a place for that in the landscape. And so we as NOCs, we still have to be accountable to our athletes who are going out there representing us. So as Sean always said, the ecosystem, there has to be a synergy, there has to be collaboration. So integrity-wise, I think everybody in the sporting ecosystem has to be held accountable to representing their brand and representing their country and ultimately their sport and themselves.
Thank you. Yes, definitely agreed. Sean, from a view from Jamaica.
Dalton, you mean?
Oh, Dalton, sorry.
Yeah, Sean has been in Jamaica a few times. But certainly, well, you know, Transparency International has talked about sports and issues like that. My only comment on that is, here's what. In the Caribbean, we have to do more in terms of good governance in sports and push that forward.
Thank you. So guys, I'm getting the wrap-up note now. I knew this was not going to be enough time. This conversation is going, as they say in the Caribbean, this conversation sweet. But I'm so glad that we've been able to get into some of the deeper discussions, particularly as we look at how we develop sport in the region. A lot of critical issues have emerged, and I know that this team, as well as this panel, as well as our, those who are on the call and others across the region, this is a live conversation. It doesn't end here. I mean, we've looked at some of the issues of shared responsibility and collaboration, so critical. We cannot go it alone. I think that is something that we all understand, and we do have to work. We do have to work together. The question of good governance, the role of the athlete, as well as the role of the organizations. There are so many stakeholders involved, and each of us has a responsibility to ensuring that we do this together. As Dalton had pointed out at the top, we are a relatively small community. We like to think that we big in the dance, and in many ways we are big in the dance, but we still are in terms of our numbers. And I think that is not a deterrent in terms of getting us onto the platforms where we want to be. And certainly some of the points that Sean raised in preparing our organizations, our sporting bodies, as well as our athletes to be able to be on that world stage and to get the audience. If we build it and if we work hard at it, they certainly will come. I'd really like to thank our panel, Yitania, Carla, Sean, Dalton. I think you've brought such a wealth of knowledge and information to the conversation. I know that this is a discussion that we will continue to have in our various communities, but certainly across the board. And I'm really glad that we were able to do this. I'm really glad to have been part of the conversation. Thank you so much. I learned a lot, and I know that our audience would have as well. So I think I'll turn it back to our studio and close it off here. Thanks so much, everyone, for a great conversation.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, and greetings from Budapest, Hungary.
Hello from Kosovo.
My name is Jerice Cologne.
My name is Rusa.
I'm Ian Smith.
Cameron Casolas.
Edwin Moses.
My name's Aki Sheikh, and I'm Head of Starlist and Integrity Services here in London, England.
I'm Senior Manager of Member Associations Governance Services at FIFA.
Integrity is the bedrock of all competitive sport. Without it, there is nothing.
By definition, it is the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles.
Integrity is surely one of the most significant elements in sports.
As a cricket umpire, one of the most important tasks for any umpire is to make sure the decision making is as efficient as possible. This can only be possible if umpires work with integrity
Perhaps now more than ever, we recognize the importance of this vision for sports and the need for integrity in every aspect of sport.
We are a member of SIGA, and not only because we believe in integrity in sports, but to the fact that we believe in coalitions and collective efforts to achieve change.
We all know that sport is one of the most powerful things on the planet for bringing about societal change, and we all want to be part of that, and we want you to be part of it, and we absolutely all need to do it together.
This is a task none of us can achieve on our own. It is one that all of us must achieve together.
I believe that together we're stronger.
Together, united, we can effect positive change by developing and promoting integrity principles and values.
I would like, first of all, to praise SIGA's leadership in the persons of its chairman and its CEO for having had the courage to organize this event under the current circumstances.
Thank you to SIGA for the work that you do for sports integrity and for the example your independent rating and verification systems for the world of sports.
Organisations such as SIGA, who are there to make standards better and to uniform all the standards throughout the industry, are needed.
SIGA is unavoidable and unrivaled organization with unrivaled role in the field of the integrity of the sport.
I think this first Integrity Week is very important.
ISST is proud to be associated with the SIGA movement.
I am proud to partner with the Sport Integrity Global Alliance and participate in this year's Sports Integrity Week.